In the previous video, we saw the basic ideas about the Sicilian defense, and in this video, we are going to look at the Alapin variation of the Sicilian defense. And after e4 c5, here white goes c3 with the idea of playing d4. This is the Alapin variation of the Sicilian defense, and here white is generally avoiding the main lines of the Sicilian defense. Here black generally have two responses. First is knight f6 and d5, which is striking in the center. So first let's look at d5. Now white takes and then you recapture this pawn with the queen. And since white played c3, he is unable to play knight to c3 to gain a tempo on your queen. So after white goes something like d4, you can just play knight f6, developing the knight, knight f3, developing his knight, and here you can develop your bishop on any of these squares, but I would recommend you play bishop to g4. He goes bishop e2, then you play e6, opening up your bishop and also defending this pawn. So white castle here, and then you go knight to c6. And let's say he goes bishop to e3, putting pressure on this pawn. Then you can just take this pawn, and after white recaptures, you can play bishop e7. And after something like knight c3 attacking your queen, you can just play queen to d6, and the position becomes quite equal. White have a weak isolated queen's pawn, which can be advantageous for black in the endgame. And if white tries to kick your bishop, you can just move the bishop back and then continue to play. Now let me show you the knight f6 line of the Alapin variation. So here after knight f6, white goes e5, attacking your knight. You play knight to d5, centralizing your knight, and here there are two moves possible. White can go d4 or knight f3. First, if he goes knight to f3, then you have two choices, either to play knight to c6 or d6 to attack this pawn right away. First, let's look at knight to c6. White goes d4. You play c takes d4, and here white can either take this pawn or play something like bishop to c4, attacking your knight. Then you just play knight to b6, counter attacking the bishop. And here, if you have not moved this d pawn, then generally the bishop moves to b3. And here we are going to play d5, striking in the center. White captures also, and then you recapture with the queen. And after white castle, you can just play bishop e6, challenging this bishop. White generally takes, and then you recapture with the queen. And here he goes knight takes d4. You go knight takes d4, and he don't want to damage his pawn structure, so he takes with the queen. And then you go rook to d8, and here there are two moves played at the top levels. First is queen h4, and there is also queen to e3, offering a trade of queens. And when you take, white will be able to develop his bishop. So what if here he goes c takes d4? Then you just play d6, challenging this pawn. He goes bishop c4, then you play knight b6, attacking this bishop. And here he goes bishop to b5, pinning your knight because you have moved the d pawn. And here you go d takes e5, knight takes e5, putting pressure on this knight. You play bishop to d7, knight takes bishop, and then you recapture. And here he goes knight c3, developing his knight. You play e6, opening up your bishop. White castle here, and then you go bishop e7. And from here you can castle and then continue to play. Now what if here, instead of playing knight to c6, you play d6. And here the main move for white is d4. You play c takes d4, white goes c takes d4. Here you play knight to c6, and here white went bishop to c4, attacking your knight. And it is just the transposition of the previous variation as we saw earlier. Bishop b5, pinning your knight to the king. D takes e5, knight takes e5, putting pressure on this knight. You just play bishop to d7 and then continue to play. Now let's look at the main move, d4. This is the move you will be facing the most. After that, you just take this pawn, and here white don't need to take this pawn. Instead, he will play knight f3. And here, don't take this pawn because your knight will be hanging. Therefore, you just play knight c6. He goes c takes d4, and it's again the same position as we saw earlier. You just play d6. He goes bishop c4. You play knight b6, attacking the bishop. He goes bishop b5, pinning your knight to the king. D takes e5, knight takes e5, and then the same bishop d7. And after takes, you just develop as we saw earlier. Well, here's a sideline that you might also face in your games. After d5, here, instead of taking this pawn, white might also go bishop to d3, defending this pawn. Then you just take this pawn, and after bishop takes, you can just play knight f6, and after bishop moves back, you can just continue to play normally. Well, if you want to learn some traps in the Sicilian defense, then you can check out this left video. And if you want to see the previous video on the Sicilian defense, then you can check out this right video. And if you don't want to miss the upcoming videos, then don't forget to subscribe.